Lisa here, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to Self-Worth Saturday. So if you are new to this series, typically what I will do is talk about a concept or a topic that is related to self-worth, and then I will explore sort of some ways that we can maybe work on this particular issue in our own lives, provide some journal prompts, maybe a challenge, well, not maybe a challenge, I will definitely provide you with a challenge. It's a maybe if you want to participate. And then I will share an oracle card reading with you guys that will sort of tie this all up and give us some sort of things to ponder as we move throughout the rest of the week. So each week I like to premiere this video. Now if you're in the live chat right now, this isn't a live video, it is pre-recorded. But the live chat allows me to watch it back with you guys and be available to chit-chat as you watch. Now, following this video, when it first premieres, I will have a live chat with Peggy, and we will talk and break down and discuss this particular topic in whatever way the group that's in that live chat kind of wants to talk about it. So I just wanted to first touch base about last week. So last week I invited us all to notice in what ways we might be rejecting love, and see if we notice that happening, see what would happen if we could just invite a little of that love in that moment. So I'm really curious to hear how you guys did. If you're watching this back later, drop it in the comments down below if you feel comfortable sharing. If you are in the live chat right now, then let us know in the live chat how you did last week. Here's how I did. So typically, this is an area where I feel like I'm kind of doing all right. I feel like over the past week, I've been a lot more, I guess the word for it is probably soft. I feel like I've been a lot softer, a little bit more receptive, and a little bit more willing to move into situations with trust. And that has allowed me to just sort of let a little bit of that love come in. I feel like I was less resistant in general, and that really, really helped me. So I'm just peeking at my notes. So let's talk about what we're going to be talking about this week, and it is boundaries. Now, this is a topic that has been on the list for a while, and it is one that I think a lot of us have really resonated with and wanted to discuss. So if, in case you don't already know, people, either I come up with topics or people who watch this channel come up with topics. They throw ideas at me in the Supportive Tarot Facebook group. If you have a topic you want me to cover, don't forget you can always send me an email at tarotwithlisa@gmail.com, or you can join us in the Facebook group and vote on in the poll or add options to the poll for everybody to vote on. I usually like to take a look at that poll, kind of see what's trending, what people most want to hear about, and then I also just take suggestions any way you want to hit me with those suggestions. So don't be afraid to participate if there's a topic you really want to see covered. This is such a vast subject, this idea of self-worth, that there are so many things we could be covering here. So jumping into boundaries, let's talk about why it's important to hold boundaries. So here's the thing. The only person that you have to spend the rest of your life with is you. Therefore, you are the boss of you, and whether you like it or not, no matter whether you have people in your life who happily help guide you and lead you, at the end of the day, you are the one responsible. Which means the only person ultimately responsible for keeping you safe and comfortable is also you. So I guess what I want us to think about when we're diving into this topic is the idea that it is up to you to write, to define, to write, and to uphold the rules of engagement or the laws that you want to have around yourself. And the reason I'm using words like rules and law and order and things like that is because I very much associate this concept of boundaries with the Emperor card from the Major Arcana. The thing is, that dominion that the Emperor is in charge of is yourself. And I think it's really important to recognize that sometimes some of us might shirk the responsibility of taking care of ourselves onto other people just because that's comfortable, or that's how we were socialized, or that's how we were raised. And I just really want to start off this entire talk with reminding you that you are ultimately the one in charge of you. That being said, it can be a really empowering thing to help teach the people in your life how to treat you. Not only is that empowering for you, but it also helps to deepen your relationships and give the people in your life a bit of a peek into the rules of engagement, how to interact with you in a way that is good for you. Most people who care about us want to interact with us in healthy ways, or in ways that support our best selves, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So not only is boundaries, having them and holding them, an important act of self-care, they also help you to have a more authentic give and take relationship. One where you're not giving too much of yourself, but you're also not taking too much. You're more aware of what your needs are and better able to advocate yourself, not only in your interpersonal relationships, but even in situations like going to the doctor or dealing with a problem at work. I think the thing is that when you have healthy boundaries, you attract people who respect those boundaries. When you don't have healthy boundaries, sometimes what happens is you become an easy mark for people who take advantage, people who are naturally takers, or people who just don't realize that they're trampling on your boundaries in the first place, which means you can end up getting taken for a bit of a ride over and over again, and that is no fun for you at all. So, what does it look like when you lack boundaries? So first of all, you might find that you have difficulty making decisions. Specifically, if you're asked about your personal wants and your needs, probably because you haven't taken a lot of time to define for yourself what your wants or needs even are, because you've spent so much of your life identifying with whatever the people around you want and need. You haven't created even that bubble to have your own experience and your own opinion. It might look like you constantly find that you're overcommitted or that you've given too much of yourself in relationships, and you might find that you do this and you don't even recognize it until you're in so deep that you're trying to figure out how to crawl your way out of all of the different obligations or pressures that are on you. You might find that you feel guilty whenever you do anything that is for you specifically, or you might feel anxious about speaking up about your needs at all. If you don't have great boundaries, you might notice that you're regularly taken advantage of, as I mentioned before. You might find that you don't even realize it's happened until afterwards, and you might find that you're just an easy target and that you're constantly feeling victimized by people in your life. You might have poor boundaries if you find yourself being passive-aggressive or getting called out for being passive-aggressive or manipulative. I find that in my own life, when I have had my poorest boundaries, I've been the most likely to beat around the bush, hint around, and or be unintentionally passive-aggressive or manipulative to get my needs met because I didn't know how to have those boundaries and ask for that stuff right up front. So, why is it so difficult for us to establish and hold boundaries in the first place? Here's the thing, and we're going to keep revisiting this over and over again. We're afraid. Usually we're afraid to establish those boundaries and hold those boundaries because we're afraid of being rejected or afraid of being alone. Whether it's with family, whether it's in relationships, whether it's even with friends, we might be afraid of establishing those boundaries because we think that it'll jeopardize the relationship. Here's a not so fun fact. It might. The reality is that having been through this myself, it was quite a process when I first started to hold and establish boundaries because I'd never done it before, and the people in my life, many of the people that I had surrounded myself with were people who appreciated, consciously or unconsciously, the fact that I had no boundaries. They enjoyed that because they were taker type people. I don't think this was people that were consciously out to hurt me or get me, but I think they were just people that were naturally more taker kind of people. And when I started establishing boundaries, it was like I suddenly changed the rules, and the reality is I did. So I did lose people when I established boundaries. So if we're afraid of losing people, or we're afraid that the people in our lives won't take it well, if we suddenly start saying no or start standing up for ourselves in some way, we tend to not do it, especially if we're from a conditioning that lets us know that we're only valuable when other people say that we're valuable. And so this was something I really struggled with and was really, really hard when I first started doing it. So I totally relate to and understand that fear. It's valid. But what's also valid is that you have a right to be treated exactly the way you deserve, which is probably better than you are currently letting yourself be treated if you're watching this video right now. Number 2, it's hard because we feel unworthy of acceptance or love. And so we assume that we need to do in order to receive that acceptance and love. Cue card from last week's topic about accepting love, because the reality is that all of this stuff is rooted in how we feel about ourselves at the most foundational level. For most of us, because we feel unworthy of love, we're constantly trying to prove that we're worthy by doing things for other people, which means saying no to somebody or stepping out of a situation that's making you uncomfortable if you think it might make that other person unhappy becomes a really terrifying thing, because doesn't that mean we're suddenly less valuable? This is what happens when we have a lower sense of self-worth, or we're struggling with self-worth. We allow ourselves to be uncomfortable because that's better than finding out that we will be rejected if we do otherwise. I hope I'm saying that right. I hope you guys understand what I mean when I say this stuff, and we will break it down more in the live chat. And even if you're watching this later, I really encourage you to watch back those live chats, because a lot of good stuff comes out in those discussions. The other reason this is so hard is because many of us never learned how to establish or hold our boundaries. Now, in the most innocent of circumstances, for many of us as children, we had parents who encouraged us to, for example, hug grandma when grandma wants a hug. It's a simple little thing, but we're also taking away autonomy from children when we don't let them have a choice. So sometimes in the most innocent of ways, we're just not really taught that we can have boundaries, for starters. And that's in the most innocent of situations. I'm sure you all can understand how in not so innocent situations, we can have our autonomy slowly stripped away from us as children and even as adults, when other people consistently teach us that we don't have the right to establish and hold those boundaries. So whether it was a lack of having healthy boundaries modeled by the role models in your life, or whether it was as a child or as a young person or a young adult or even an adult having your boundaries such as they were constantly trampled, in either case, you're not really learning how to establish or hold healthy boundaries. The scratching was my dog, who was upset that the door was a little too closed for her liking, just so you know. Another reason that this is hard is because we just haven't gotten a chance. Let me back up. We haven't made the time to get to know ourselves. Sometimes the reason we have trouble establishing or holding boundaries is because we don't even know what they are. We have spent so much time identifying with the needs of other people in our lives that we haven't even taken the time to figure out what it is we need, deserve, or want in our lives, enough to actually create those boundaries for ourselves. And finally, we might experience anxiety around other people's not so positive emotions. If you find it really difficult, either as an empath or just as a person, if you find it really difficult when other people seem frustrated, annoyed, put out, any of those kinds of things, angry, then just saying no to some of those people, or to any people, can be kind of stressful. If you're the kind of person that just likes to make people happy and isn't so good with sitting with other people's less comfortable emotions, you might sort of not establish or hold boundaries just so you don't have to deal with that discomfort. So let's talk about how to start establishing boundaries and then practice holding them. This is a tricky and deep topic, and I'm sorry because Peggy's doing the dishes right now, so you can probably totally hear her, but that's okay. It's all good. I don't have to do the dishes, so I'm not going to complain. So consider, here's the first step, and this is the biggest one, the most time-consuming one, and yes, it does require a bit of work. But first things first, think about and actually write down what you deserve, what your rights are, both just as a human being and in your various roles. Like, what are your rights as a mother? What are your rights as a sister, as a best friend? What are your rights as a partner? What do you have the right to expect from other people? And this is tricky if you're not used to feeling like you have the right to anything. So, in order to make it a little bit easier, imagine what you would say to somebody else that you care about what their rights are. What would you tell somebody else they have the right to expect? Fair treatment? Honesty? Respect. There's some basic things that you can start to explore that you have a right to expect and that you deserve as a human being in your life. So it's really important to start defining and writing that stuff down so you can actually figure out what it is that you need better boundaries around. Next, notice where and when you feel empowered or disempowered when you're moving through your day. Notice if sort of where some of those personal rights or needs that you've written about are being negatively impacted or trampled just as you move through the day. Maybe you notice that You feel like you have a need or a right to expect that people will speak respectfully to you or politely to you. And you notice that maybe there's people in your life at work or at home who are constantly snipping at you or speaking to you in a tone that you know deep down you don't deserve. You might notice things like that. Start to notice and pay attention to where your new boundaries may already be challenged. It's important to kind of note that that's happening so that you can figure out what maybe needs to be addressed if you're going to start holding these new personal boundaries. Let's see. Oh yes, that's what I was going to say. Once you notice, it's important to maybe try practicing holding that boundary a little bit. This might just mean speaking up in whatever way you're comfortable with whomever you're comfortable about how you would like to be treated instead. Keep in mind that sometimes that's not appropriate or it's not something you feel safe doing, and sometimes the way to hold your boundary is to just extract yourself from the situation that is trampling on your boundary. I hope that makes sense. Speaking of which, it's important to recognize that boundaries are about you and only you. That means it's not like your boundary is something you get to enforce on other people or that you can expect other people to necessarily respect. Everybody's going to have their own opinions and their own sort of baggage and their own stuff that's related to how they're going to treat other people that has nothing to do with you, even when it feels personal. That means that once you decide what your boundary is and you commit to upholding and protecting that boundary, which you have every right to do, you may find that there's not always an easy answer. Sometimes you'll find that a boundary that you need for your own personal well-being and self-care doesn't jive with somebody else. And then it's your responsibility, not theirs, to protect that boundary by doing what you need to do. And that might mean spending less time or no time with the people whose behavior doesn't stay in line with your boundaries. Sometimes it's going to be appropriate to say something to people and give them an opportunity to change that behavior should they want to. But ultimately, they're not the ones in charge of you. You're in charge of you. This is where it gets kind of tricky, right? So here's the other piece about that. You can actively hold your boundary in a direct and assertive way by speaking up for yourself with the people that you think that it makes sense to do that with. But you can also protect your boundary just by walking away, distancing yourself from the people that trample those boundaries, because sometimes those boundaries don't even have to make sense to somebody else and may not even be fair to ask somebody else to accommodate. Let me see if I can explain. So I might have an issue around hospitals for a whole number of reasons. So sometimes a self-care boundary for me is not visiting hospitals as much as I might want to be there for somebody else. Now, is it everybody's duty to understand and respect that I don't want to go to the hospital? No. And people might have feelings about that, and they might be upset and hurt by that. It's my job to look after my boundary, and if that means that things shift and move and I have to have harder conversations, then that's what that means. And sometimes I'm flexible with my boundaries for the right person or the right situation or the right reason. But ultimately, it's me that's responsible for it. I can't expect other people to protect me from the things that trample my boundaries. That's my job. So sometimes it's active like that. Sometimes it's just that, here's a good example. I think. We'll see. Let's say that you feel like one of your boundaries or one of the needs that you have is that your friendship with your best friend needs to feel fairly equal, which means you don't want to feel like you're always the only one reaching out to initiate a conversation. You want to feel like it's a two-way street. Now, there's a couple different ways you could handle that. You could say to your friend, hey, I feel like I'm always the only one reaching out. I'd like you to reach out more. And you can let them know how you're feeling about that. Then they either do or don't change their behavior, and again, not your responsibility. You just have to be prepared to do what you need to do to make sure that you feel okay about the relationship, no matter how it goes, even if that means distancing yourself. The other thing is that you could handle it in a passive way, which is different than passive-aggressive. Passive means you might just initiate contact less because that's healthier for you. But it doesn't mean dropping all of these hints and beating around the bush that your friend should just call you more. Sorry for the motorcycle, or whatever that was. And also for the dishes. The point here, I guess I'm trying to make, is it doesn't always have to be a confrontation. Sometimes it might be, if that's the right way for you and that feels like the appropriate way to handle it. But sometimes it might just be you pulling away from a situation or a relationship where you're not finding the balance is there, or you're feeling like your needs aren't being met. Be willing, this is the hard one, but it's the truth, and I know I've mentioned it before, be willing to let people go. If you really want to uphold a way that you deserve to be treated, if you really are working on this self-worth stuff and you know you deserve respect and kindness and compassion, if you offer those things to the people in your life, if you are constantly giving and doing for other people and they are never giving and doing for you, and you start asking for things and you're not getting them, or if you just know it's not going to change or whatever, at a certain point you have to, I think, speaking from my me place, you hit a point where you kind of have to be willing to let some of those less healthy or less balanced relationships go when they no longer serve you. And you can do that in a loving and compassionate way. It doesn't have to be a horrible breakup or with a friend, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's just a conversation about how you're not in the same place anymore. Sometimes it's just letting things grow apart. Sometimes you're just not in the same place anymore. And it's sad and it's hard, but we outgrow situations, and we do sometimes outgrow relationships, all kinds of relationships. So when I first started figuring out that I wanted to have more self-worth and engage in the world in a way that I felt confident and empowered and had agency, I found that suddenly standing up for myself, suddenly kindly and compassionately asking for and expecting a certain level of treatment, some people did fall by the wayside. And a lot of those people, it was because they just didn't know how to interact with the new me. And this is the reality, I guess, of being on a personal growth path, is sometimes, you know, somebody that you had great chemistry with when you were always the one doing all of the work, suddenly when that shifts, it's just not good anymore. And sometimes it's totally different reasons, right? So I feel like I've gone a bit on a tangent. And if you're still with me, congratulations, because this feels like a very broad and winding topic. Let's get into journal prompts. I hope I've given you guys a lot to chew on already, but if you want to dive into this in your writing or journaling practice, here's a few things to consider writing about. Number 1, think of at least one boundary that you know you could or should implement right away if only you had the courage. Write about what that boundary is and how you might go about holding it. 2, think about the last time you put yourself and your wants and needs first, and write about that experience. If you can't seem to think of one, write about that. And finally, write about the ways in which having better boundaries might improve your quality of life or the quality of your relationships. And finally, our challenge. So I have an oracle deck. I am working with the Connected and Free this week, or at least at the time I'm filming this. It'll flip over on Saturday, so I know at the time you're watching this, I'll have already moved on to an oracle deck, but this is the deck I'm working with this week. So here's our challenge. Create one new personal boundary for yourself and just practice holding it. Make it a small, easily attainable kind of thing. Because if you do these challenges and you start with something super big, it's hard. Start with something really, really small. And just remember that this can be as simple as, I'm just not going to say yes to anybody without counting to 3 first. I'm going to think about my needs for just that split second before I say yes to what somebody else wants me to do for them. That's just an example. You can do you. You do whatever one you want to do. And I would encourage you to write down in your planner, your journal, or someplace else, whatever that boundary is you're going to be working on establishing and holding this week. And we'll chat and check in next week about how that went for you. So here is this week's oracle card. Spiritual suffering. So this kind of cracks me up. Well, not funny, but interesting, synchronous kind of way. So in my opinion, and this is a parable that I believe is originally a Buddhist parable, somebody can definitely educate us on that in the comments or in the chat. There's the story of the second arrow. I've posted about this before. The idea is that when you're wounded, when something hurts you, the first arrow is sort of the actual pain of that wound, that emotional wound, that physical wound, whatever it might be. Everything after that, the pain that you feel after that, is about the feelings you have about that pain, how that pain came to be, what caused it, all of that other stuff is additional suffering that we experience when we're processing a difficult experience. So the thing about boundaries is that you can actually prevent that second arrow. You can have like a rule for engagement with yourself, rules of engagement with you that you establish with other people. You can teach other people how to treat you, and then when they overstep on that boundary, that's that first arrow. And you can prevent the other arrows by extricating yourself from that situation, by holding your boundary, or by speaking up for yourself when that kind of stuff happens, especially if it's something that you feel is appropriate to speak up about. We don't have to experience this extra suffering, and sometimes this is also about all of those obligations that we take on from other people, stuff that we agree to, the way we let ourselves get overloaded when we don't really need to. If we were better at saying, not today, I don't have the bandwidth, or I don't have the energy, or I'm not up for that, when it's true, we would keep ourselves from these feelings of being constantly weighed down by other people's needs and expectations. Just stuff to think about. So thank you so much for joining me for today's Self-Worth Saturday chit-chat and discussion on boundaries. Again, it's a huge topic, so I can't wait to unpack more of it with some of you guys in the live chat. But if you miss it, don't even worry about it. Leave some comments down below. We can continue the discussion, or join us over in the Supportive Tarot Facebook group and we can talk about it more there. Remember, as always, to like this video if you enjoy this particular series or my channel. It's a great way to let YouTube know that this is the kind of content you want to see. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here and click the bell so you don't miss my future videos. And as always, remember to repeat to yourself as often as possible, I am worthy and I am unafraid. Bye.